Yes. Um, I'm going to just talk a little bit about the impetus behind starting this webinar series on school leadership. Both Global School Leaders and the World Bank Education Group have been thinking about the learning crisis in education and how we can get students to be learning more in schools, particularly in low and middle income countries, and both believe that school leadership has a strong role to play in this work, and so have come together to run a series of 3 webinars on school leadership. The first webinar was in July and focused on the importance of leadership at improving schools. Today's webinar will be talking about recent learnings from school leadership capacity building and what we've learned about evaluations of school leadership training and new initiatives to train school leaders. And so I will introduce the panelists in a moment, but if I could just remind everyone to keep themselves on mute. But if you have questions, please write them in the chat and we'll make sure we get them to the panelists. The format of today's conversation will be each speaker will have roughly 10 minutes and I'll be doing a kind of question answer with them for 10 minutes, and then we will kind of bring everyone together at the end for question and answer and for general discussion. And the goal is to get the panelists not only to kind of share their work, but to interact with each other and exchange ideas about how their work each time overlaps with each other. I know each of the people on this panel personally, and very excited to have them share and kind of enter this conversation. Uh, so um, to kind of kick off the group and to kind of introduce the topic in a little more detail, we have Harry Petrinos. Harry is a practice manager for the Europe and Central Asia region of the World Bank's Education Global Practice. He specializes in all areas of education, and especially school-based management, demand-side financing, and public and private partnerships. He managed education lending, operations and analytical work programs in Argentina, Colombia, Mexico, as well as regional research projects on the socioeconomic status of Latin America's indigenous peoples. He is one of the main authors of the report Lifelong Learning in the Global Knowledge Economy. He's also co-author of books Policy Analysis of Child Labor, a Comparative Study, and Decentralization of Education, a Demand-Side Financing. Uh, and finally, The Indigenous People and Poverty in Latin America, an Empirical Analysis. So Harry, we're very excited to have you give some introductory remarks.
Thank you very much, Samir. Thank you for the invitation to be here on this important topic and South-South exchange. My knowledge in this area comes from the work we've done on parental participation and school management. I think the COVID-19 pandemic has reminded us of the tremendous value of teachers, if we needed to be reminded of that. But also it confirmed the importance of school leadership. This has been a critical time for school leaders who try to balance the need for safety and security while ensuring learning continuity. And it hasn't been easy. We've seen cases of parents and others suing political leaders over school closings, school openings, and the like. Several examples of this throughout the United States, in New Jersey, Las Vegas, West Virginia, just to name a few. We've also seen cases where community leaders have focused on issues other than education during the pandemic, renaming schools in San Francisco, and paid a pretty high price for this mistake. And we know that parents will voice concerns, but we also know that not all parents have equal power. And there need to be avenues for parental voice and participation. We've learned over the years that if you involve parents, and in the example I know well, it's very poor parents, particularly in rural isolated communities, including ethnic minorities, or in the case of Mexico, indigenous peoples, you can improve academic results as well, as we documented for a very inexpensive program in rural Mexico that involves parents directly in the management of schools in particularly disadvantaged rural communities. This program, which financed parent associations, motivated parents to participate by involving them in the management of very small grants that went to the schools. In the first evaluation, we found the program reduced grade failure significantly and reduced grade repetition significantly, very early grades of primary school. It showed us that you can create mechanisms of accountability while also empowering local actors. And such programs don't have to be expensive. Sometimes they only require training parental groups in some areas of school management. Another evaluation where we looked at the parental involvement programs and how they might strengthen school-home relations with the goal of improving educational outcomes was recently published. Here we examined the effects of the same program in Mexico with a slightly different design. We looked at whether giving more grants would improve learning outcomes, and tried to disentangle the impact of the information and parental training components. We separately estimated the effects of the grants from the effect of the information using two randomized controlled trials conducted by government during the rollout of the program. The grants themselves to parent associations didn't improve outcomes. In fact, it was extra double grants. The grant program itself did have an impact on some academic outcomes, but increasing the grants did not. However, information to parents, parent associations that is, reduced disciplinary actions in schools, mainly by increasing parental involvement in schools and changing parenting behavior at home. These divergent results from the grants and the information components are partly explained by significant changes in perceptions of trust between parents and teachers. From these three studies, we learned that simply providing grants to schools doesn't necessarily improve educational outcomes, and this is consistent with other studies in other parts of the world. Second, we learned that providing information to parents significantly improves outcomes, reducing disciplinary actions, and these results are consistent with other programs, including a parental involvement program in Paris, France, which gave parents information about the functioning of schools and advice on how to support children with their schoolwork. The information interventions studied in our study and the Paris study both reduced disciplinary infractions, which is a measure of non-cognitive or socio-emotional skills. But both studies did not lead to increases in test scores, a measure of cognitive skills. Our results on non-cognitive skills are particularly important given that the long-term effects of early child interventions, which have a strong focus on providing information and training to parents, are often attributed to these programs' effects on children's non-cognitive skills. The third lesson is that information interventions can improve student behavior by changing parents' behaviors. Parents in schools that received the information intervention were 15 percentage points more likely to organize school activities and more likely to meet regularly with teachers to discuss student performance and to help their children with their schoolwork. To place these estimates in context, these effects are large enough to close the gap in parenting practices between families attending indigenous schools, historically under-resourced schools, and general schools, public schools, predominantly serving non-indigenous families. These programs build trust. They bring together teachers and the school and parents to work together to support the needs of children. And trust is important. It's a core component of social capital, as argued by many, including Coleman and Putnam. training and information can help build trust. We also learn that information empowers. Leaders need information to act properly. Informing them of their actual performance using objective data can propel positive action. One of the studies I was proud to be a part of with Rafael Dehoyos looked at an accountability intervention in Mexico, a very low stakes accountability intervention, providing information to school leaders. It led to a positive change in test scores in a very short period of time. Just a few months after the program was launched, test scores were up by at least 0.12 of a standard deviation. These results indicate that full and wide dissemination of information detailing school quality is critically important. Turning to the topic at hand, we also know there's a positive relationship between management practices at schools and student test scores, as our colleague Bernetta Lemos and others have demonstrated. And these findings pertain to both public and private schools. So I have no doubt that we will learn a lot today about school leadership policies and what works, what more we can do, and what more we need to learn about these programs. I look forward to hearing the discussions and discussing your recommendations. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Harry. Thank you for those introductory remarks and for kind of giving that overview on the topic. So what we're going to do now is have each of our three panelists give a short answers to my questions and just kind of in a conversational style. And we're going to start with Folawe Ominkule. Folawe is the CEO of Teach for Nigeria, and she's led the organization through the startup planning and development phases. And in 2017, she was named one of the most 100 influential young Nigerians, an honor that recognizes her experience and commitment to social development. So Folawe, I'm very excited to have you here as a part of this panel. So I know, Folawe, just to kick us off, I know you at Teach for Nigeria started the work focused on teachers and recruiting teachers into the field, but have recently started also work in school leadership. So if you could tell us a little bit about the work Teach for Nigeria does and why you've decided to get into school leadership training or capacity building.
Thank you so very much, Samir, and good afternoon, everyone from Lagos. Good morning from wherever you are. Good evening. And I'm Chief Executive Officer at Teach for Nigeria, just as Samir has introduced. And Teach for Nigeria is an organization that is focused on addressing educational inequity. And we do it through a very unique approach where we recruit fresh graduates and young professionals, and we train and place them to teach in high-need schools across Nigeria. And we provide ongoing training and support to them. But, you know, at the end of the day, the focus isn't only to get them to teach, but the focus is also to, you know, really get them to develop as leaders for the education ecosystem so that they're able to support children at various levels to be able to attain the sort of level of education that they need to be successful. And so whilst we started the program recruiting fresh graduates from diverse academic backgrounds, we started to gather data. We were realizing that some of our best performing fellows, as we call them, or teachers, you know, had something in common. And we found that it was really having dynamic and really supportive head teachers and principals that was enabling them to attain those successes. You know, so we started to engage with some of these head teachers, and we saw that what the difference between them and the fellows who were struggling to, you know, be creative and be innovative in their school was just head teachers and principals who were open-minded, who had growth mindset, who were transformative leaders in themselves. And so we started to, you know, see how having such solid school leadership also enabled our fellows to be impactful in their classrooms, to be able to teach students successfully, to be able to come up with different ideas and innovations to further support their students. And so the conversation with us inside to say that if we wanted to get to a place where all our students, were succeeding, all our students were attaining the level of learning outcomes that we were working towards and the goals that we're working, towards them attaining, we also needed to be doing some sort of work with all the head teachers in our schools. So we started this school leadership development program that allowed us to bring, our head teachers also into the space where we're working in, where we're training them really, because there's a lot that we could be providing for principals and head teachers, but we're focusing on let's just fix the mindset. Let us get all of these head teachers to be transformative school leaders. Let us get them to be problem solvers and innovators and solution providers. So we launched the program last year. Again, this was also like coming out of COVID and realizing that during COVID, again, the schools that were performing, the teachers that were teaching, again, were enabled by having really solid and dynamic head teachers. So we're convinced that it was the right time to start a fellowship program for our head teachers. And this fellowship program, of course, we recognize that lots of resources required for head teachers to be successful. There's the technical skills, there's the financial resources to be able to run their schools and all of that. But we, again, are focusing on the mindset. And I can tell you, it's been only 5 months since we started this fellowship. A teacher, a head teacher, and a principal who never realized how much space that they had in the school. So one of the challenges was, they don't have the resources, government isn't providing the funding to them. They've just taken a land that they were sharing between 2 school compounds, and they're now setting up a farm, and the resources that will be generated from that, they're hoping to incorporate it into running their school. And, that's one example. Another example was, this head teacher that had this monitor and this, computer that had been in the school all along, but never really realized that, he could take responsibility to go in to fix it. And now he's using that computer to train students in their school on digital skills. And he's also using the computer to, gather data instead of the, writing, because the context that we work in really high need schools. But it's like that sense of ownership, that sense of responsibility, that perseverance, and that entrepreneurial skills that we're now seeing our head teachers possess. So it's an exciting one for us. So far, we've had 20 applicants to the program, but we currently have 13 head teachers who are on that program. And the conversation is, how do we expand this? Because we're really seeing a lot of impact and a lot of progress, with the school leadership amongst the principals and head teachers.
Great, thank you, Falawe. It sounds like very kind of promising start to a new initiative. And you guys are working kind of very closely with these school leaders and really kind of getting into the day-to-day challenges they might be facing. I'm curious if you maybe zoom out a little bit, because the next 2 speakers will be researchers. So maybe speaking to them a little bit, kind of to the research community, what are the questions that you kind of as a practitioner working alongside school leaders have about school leadership training, right? So what are the questions that you would like researchers to kind of take on to kind of help you better understand or how to improve your program?
So when I think about the sort of questions, I think that when you engage with them, the participants of the sort of program that we're working on, one of the things that says, we don't have, government is not giving us, there's never enough resources provided. But I think that maybe what researchers could be going into could be, yes, we understand that there are limitations, we understand that there are limited resources, but what else are the factors? What else can enable effective schools, for you to run an effective school or for you to run a high performing schools? What other factors could enable that? What are the non-financial resources, for example, that could be provided, that if you had, you'll be able to run effective schools? I think also just what are the enablers that would allow for you to run an effective, and what does an effective school even look like in this various contexts as well? I think that, that might, be some of the focus. I think also just understanding that the responsibility to run effective schools, is beyond just the school head, right? So maybe also questions for teachers and questions for parents and questions for community members around what are some of the factors, what are the elements that they would they would want to see for schools to be run effectively, or what support can they be providing, or how do they see their roles, with like running effective schools. So I think maybe those are some of the questions that they might want to focus on. As the conversation goes on, I'm more than happy to share like additional thoughts on some of those questions that I think researchers could focus on.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Falawe. Um, we will be coming back to you in a little bit once we can get into the question answer section. So I will next bring in Rafael Dehoyos. Rafa is currently the lead economist, program leader for the Europe and Central Asia region of the World Bank. He's published in peer-reviewed journals and advised governments on school-based management, evaluation policies, and strategies to reduce dropout rates. He's a member of the World Bank Development Report Committee, Realizing the Promise of Education. Previously, he was the chief advisor to the Under Minister of Education in Mexico. And before that, he worked in the Development Economics Vice Presidency at the World Bank and with the University of Cambridge, as well as with a consultant as a consultant with the United Nations Economic Commission in Latin America. So, Rafa, welcome to the panel. Very excited for you to join as well. I know that you have recently conducted an evaluation of some school leadership training work in Mexico. And I'd be really curious to have you kick us off by telling us a little bit about that study, as well as the implications of that study for organizations like Global School Leaders or for Falawe's Teach for Nigeria, and kind of what the maybe key lessons are for practitioner organizations like ours. We cannot hear you, Rafa.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Samir, for the invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be here. Let me start by describing the evaluation that you were referring to. It's a bit complex and it has like several components, but I'll try to summarize it in 5 minutes. So to do this, we have to transport ourselves to 2013. It was a new administration in Mexico, and one of the flagship programs that they were trying to promote in the Ministry of Education was a program to provide more autonomy to schools in Mexico. And the way they conceived this strengthening of school autonomy was via 2 mechanisms. One is providing schools with direct resources, so with grants, so that schools would exercise their autonomy in a more effective way. And the other one was through the provision of training for school directors. So the logic was that we will give schools more resources so that they can tackle their own problems, but we will also provide school directors with better managerial practices through training. And we managed to convince the Mexican government to evaluate 2 things. The first one is what's the impact of the school grants on both managerial practices and student learning outcomes. And the second one is that the Mexican government intended to reach all 180,000 primary schools in Mexico via a cascade mode. So a few number of professional trainers were responsible of training a larger amount of supervisors. Then the supervisors were in charge of training school directors and so forth and so on. So we managed to convince the Mexican government to do a control experiment where some schools would receive the same contents in terms of training as the ones received through the cascade mode, but directly to the school directors from a professional trainer. And we did this in a randomized control trial. So we have a group of schools that is receiving these professional trainers and grants. We have a school that is receiving only grants, and we have a control group. But remember, all of them are receiving some sort of training through the cascade mode. And we learned several things, but I try to keep it short, and we learned three things. The first one is that the cascade mode, compared to the training received through a professional trainer, is very ineffective. So when we measure these using an instrument called the World Management Survey that has been applied in several countries, what we see is that after 2 years of intervening, 2 years of interventions, the school directors that got the training through a professional, they are doing significantly better in terms of the WMS. The other thing that we learn is that grants are not having any impact on managerial practices. So after 2 years of receiving grants, without a professional training to improve managerial practices, the school directors are pretty much just replicating the same practices that they were doing before receiving the grants. Then the third thing, and this is the most complex one, because all the purpose of the intervention was to improve student learning outcomes. But the third thing that we learn is that even in the cases where we managed to increase or improve managerial practices among school directors because they were receiving grants and a professional trainer, even in those cases, that was not enough to improve student learning outcomes. Now, is this a failure of the intervention? I don't think we can classify this as a failure of the intervention. The intervention meant to improve managerial practices among school directors when it was done in a controlled way, not through the cascade mode. So that was achieved, but that was not enough to identify statistically significant improvements among school directors. So it seems that either if we want to improve student learnings through an intervention that is going through directors or aiming to improve managerial practices, we have to have very large effects in terms of managerial practices for these to translate into better student learning outcomes. And this is not at odds with what we knew ex ante. So the paper that was cited by Harry in his introduction, where we know that there's this correlation that was shown by Bloom, Renata, and others, this positive correlation between better management practices measured by the WMS and better, let's say, PISA results or other standardized testing results. The correlation that is shown by these papers are showing correlations that are relatively small. So that tells you that when you want to increase student learnings with a managerial intervention, you better have like very big effects, or you have to have an intervention that is there for a long enough time. So that's in a nutshell what we learned.
Excellent. Rafa, I think one other, implication of your work, or kind of suggestive from your work, was what Falawe was asking earlier during her talk around what are the other factors, or what are the kind of enabling factors for successful leadership. So I think it would be interesting for you to talk a little bit about what you've learned about that, both kind of through the study, but even just, I know school leadership is something you've been working on for the past, it's kind of 10 years in the making, the study that you just talked about. So just kind of through that time, if you have any ideas around what you think those enabling factors for successful leadership are?
I think that one of the main lessons that I draw from this experience is that school directors, at least in Mexico, and I would say that in many Latin American countries, they have very little legal attributes. So they are very restricted in terms of what is it that they can do. So actually, the best school directors in the context of Mexico, the best school directors, they were jumping these restrictions. They were taking attributions that they didn't have, and they were contacting the local leader to get some resources. They were actually providing some sort of feedback to their teachers. They were including parent associations into into some sort of a joint management committee. And these are legal attributes that school directors in Mexico do not have. So when you think about whether we should have a more accountability in a system like Mexico, or just trust directors more, I would go for the second one. It's like the best ones are the ones that are committed, and if we give them the space, the resources, the help, the technical assistance that they need, then they would thrive, and they know better than a guy sitting in Washington or even in Mexico City. They know better how to transform all these inputs into better student learning outcomes. So that is for me the great lesson of these. Now there are other elements that are important for school directors to perform effectively their job. And one of them was also mentioned by Harry in the introduction, is like, look, if you provide school directors with a tool to monitor student learning, which is the single most important variable in the education system, then as our experiment in Colima, our evaluation in Colima shows, and other experiments that we've done in Argentina is also showing, you provide them with information, and school directors, with a minimum of technical assistance, they will be able to transform this input that results from the standardized test into school improvement plan that will address the problems and limitations that are shown by standardized testing. So I think that there are other tools, but I'll just keep it there. Like, you need to trust them more. You have to give them more autonomy, and second, you have to give them tools for them to exploit the full potential of their autonomy.
Great. Thank you, Rafa. We'll be coming back to you. I think that that was a very good segue to our next speaker, to Sabrina Big and her study. So Sabrina is assistant professor of economics at Lerner College of Business and Economics at the University of Delaware. She's a development economist specializing in the economics of human capital and the political economy. She focuses on vulnerable populations in the developing world, including students and farmers. Her work includes randomized controlled trials in Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Ghana. And her research also uses rich administrative data to understand the behavior of politicians in developing countries and subsequent efforts on economic outcomes. So Sabrina, welcome to the panel. Sabrina, if you could just start off by a similar question to what I asked Rafa about the study in Mexico. If you could briefly describe the study on school management that you did in Ghana, and talk a little bit about the implications that that study might have for implementing organizations like Teach for Nigeria or Global School Leaders.
Great, thank you very much. Great to see you all here. I am Sabrina Big, as Samir mentioned. I have some work that I'm going to talk about with school leaders in Ghana. Just to sort of what was the motivating factor and what was the descriptive evidence that we had that there were capacity constraints in terms of school leadership included. There is existing work, as Rafa and Harry were mentioning, on some evidence that better managed schools perform better, have better test scores. But then how do we achieve those test scores? How do we intervene at the manager level, at the leader level to achieve those gains? Wasn't so clear. It's, like Rafa's study pointed out, you can try to improve management, but sometimes you don't achieve those test score gains. And on the other hand, as Falawe was mentioning, we have this menu of options that we can implement in schools that tell us from existing evidence would be effective. So teacher trainings and pedagogical approaches that improve the classroom experience and improve learning. But when we sort of bring them into large systems of education, they turn out to not be effective, not because they're not good recipes, but because they suffer from implementation challenges. That was the motivation for this study, to understand how we can leverage leadership, school leaders, to improve the efficacy of what we might know from more controlled environments would be successful in improving student. So we combine in our study teacher training and school manager training to see if we can improve both the implementation of teacher training in the classroom, where previous experience has showed that if you train teachers and if they're in an environment where they have a lot of support and supervision, they use those trainings effectively in the classroom. But if you train teachers in the same way in a large public school system, they rarely implement. They implement the program, the pedagogical approach less than 10% of the times. So that was sort of the premise of trying to come teacher training and managers in this study. When we went into a field, we also learned that these managers have very minimal training, and also the mundane nature of the tasks that they do sort of detract the overall mission of being transformative leaders, learning and delivering learning to hundreds of thousands. So oftentimes managers, the head teachers or other forms of school system managers following a career trajectory where their position as based on seniority. So once they spend several years as teachers, they transition teachers and sort of there's no other thing that's added to that transition or their position as school leaders. And they're filling out forms most of the day, and these forms are not really going anywhere. So there was this element of reminding them of their mission and them this the tools that they need to really push learning in classrooms. So what we ended up implementing and evaluating a teacher training program that trains on teaching students according to their ability level instead of their grade level. So this is a pedagogical approach that ensures that students are learning despite where they are in terms of. So within the same classroom, you might have students of different ability. Oftentimes teachers are teaching to the curriculum, and students that have been left behind for other reasons would never be able to catch up if the teacher ties her teaching to the curriculum. So this training provides teachers with teaching and learning materials and allows them to sort of teach students where they are. However, we also managers by simply providing them a tool to improve the effectiveness of this teacher training. So managers come, on the teacher training, so they know what the teachers are doing, and they have checklists allows them to sort of check off whether teachers are using teaching and learning materials, whether they're dividing students into small groups, so on and so forth. So this very basic engagement of managers turns out to improve the implementation of the teacher technique as well as student learning. Why we think it matters is because it sort of induces a dialogue between head teachers and teachers. We see teachers significantly more in the classroom, which they were not doing. And so here is where some of the elements, some of the themes that have come up in the earlier discussion, so it matters, is if you can train teachers and you can train head teachers and improve management practices, but you don't see it happening in you don't see it happening on student learning. What seems to be the big driver is what happens in the classroom. So if you can get leaders to both monitor but also support what is happening, you can achieve those gains, is what we experience. And there's also this factor, this element of complementarity. So in order to move the whole ecosystem, we might need to move more than one thing. So we can train managers and we can give them the skills, but maybe we need to add on teacher training, or maybe we need to add on more inputs or grants or parental involvement. And those are some of the open questions that I guess we need to get better answers to be. The existing evidence seems to be pointing in the direction of unearthing this interaction between leaders and other inputs into the education production function. In our study, we also implement form of the intervention, slightly different. We'll provide additional management training to managers. So we give them the checklist and the tools that allow them to be in the classroom and engage with teachers, but we enhance their training. So they're given additional training on how to have feedback, how to provide feedback to teachers. We emphasize during this training their role as coaches more than monitors. Again, this management training was motivated by the factors that seem to be correlated with higher desk score, or factors that we know from outside the education sector makes better. So this training was really focused on making them, nicer managers, better managers to be around, to be less of a critical manager and more of a supportive and a coach. That again, sort of enhanced part of the training did not seem to matter so much. So once you, again, it comes back to the point that once you provide head leaders the tools to engage with the classroom and you provide them inputs, in our case, teacher trainings, you achieve learning engagement. Management training of the form that we implemented does not add so much, which then goes back to Rafa's point. Maybe you need a much bigger push to on the to move things on the learning margin, or you need to combine it with something else that is directly related to the classroom. And so those are circling back to what are the levers or what are the factors that could combine with school leadership. I would say there are factors that affect related to the student experience, what happens in the classroom if you want to move learning, which is at the end of the day the output that school systems are producing.
Great, thanks, Sabrina. A little disheartening to know that making managers nicer doesn't do anything for students, but maybe just as a follow-up, as you think about kind of school leadership training, right? And Falawe is running a program now. What are the things that you would want to be kind of trying or learning about as it relates to school leadership capacity building moving forward? And what do you think are kind of the key questions of research that practitioner orgs like ours should be thinking about?
Exactly that. What part of school or what they do is most crucial for learning? So like I explained, we can make better managers and teachers. In our experiment, we find that teachers significantly improve their perception of managers. So in the end, that might be a good thing. It's a good thing for teachers. But if you really focus on student learning, I think one very big open research question is that we're still pretty that school leaders are very important, but we want to understand the part, over the spectrum of the things that they do, where do we get the biggest sort of return on intervention? What parts of leadership can we intervene on and improve capacity to eventually have the benefits flow down to students and in the classroom? And along similar lines, what complementary inputs can we inject into the system gains? In our experience, we see teacher training, it's very minimal manager, providing managers with some tools effective. So similarly, what forms of parental engagement or what kinds of, whether it's infrastructure inputs or just plain grants, what complementary factors would bring up the effect of school management on learning?
Great. Thank you, Sabrina, for sharing that. We'll be coming back to you when we get to the discussion portion of the webinar. But I'm going to now turn us to Iwan Siaril. So Pak Iwan is the Director General of Teachers and Education Personnel in the Ministry of Education and Culture in Indonesia, assisting Minister Nadiem Makarim. Previously, Iwan was the Dean and Professor of Education at Sampurna University. He's also a member of the team that designed the Social and Personality Competency Teacher Training for DKI Jakarta Education Agency. Iwan's also a member of the expert team at the National Accreditation Board of Schools and Madrasas and a consultant for the United Nations Development Program designing the SDG Leadership Academy curriculum. So, Pak Iwan, thank you for joining the session today. I guess the question that I would love to have you start with is if I know you've been working in the Ministry of Education for the past few years. I'm curious to hear what is happening within the Ministry of Education in Indonesia to support school leaders to build their capacity, and what are kind of the new initiatives that you all are trying on that front.
Hi, Samir. Thank you for inviting me for this event. And I'm sorry I cannot. I think I'm in the one of the quite challenging areas in Indonesia at the moment, supervising the school reopening. This is in Nusa Tenggara area. To respond to your question, I think we are shifting our core strategy in transforming education to school leadership. I think it's based on our reflection what has happened in the past. To put it in a simple word, that a lot of effort has been made to train teachers, and very not sufficient for school leadership. And as a result was that we might have got like quite good results for and enlightening the teachers with like the more student-centered progressive education ideas. But when these teachers go back to schools, and the school principals and the school supervisors don't understand, and therefore not supporting, and maybe confused about what these teachers are trying to do. So then this investment to transform the teaching and learning practices in schools did not really happen to the level that we want. So then I think now we're changing our theory of change, and putting much more emphasis on school leadership. And one of the another reason was that like the culture, and I think this is like other speakers mentioned this too, that school leaders are actually like very like key influencers in a lot of like teaching and learning practices. So previously, that teachers when they want to do like professional development, they need like letters from the school principal or the local education office. And what we're thinking now, that if we invest in school leaders, then in each school can be like a community of learners that is facilitated or coached by, mentored by the school leader. So this is like the philosophy of the instructional leadership. So then the problems that the teachers are facing in their classroom then can be discussed within the school in a much faster way, much more relevant and efficient way, rather than the problems then to be addressed, let's say, in the workshop in the next semester, when the school teachers have the opportunity to get a workshop by the local education office or something like that. So we are investing in school leaders, and our theory of change is that if each of the school principal in Indonesia is a student-centered oriented principal, put students first in every key decision making in the school, and they can be the coach or mentor for the other teachers. Therefore, the learning community or the professional development therefore starts in school. And I think this is the foundation. So we are now on the mission. We have about 300,000 schools in Indonesia. So by 2024, we aim to hit the target about producing about 400,000 the new generation of school leaders in Indonesia. So it's very ambitious, as I think you mentioned before. But what we can say, the results, I think, are actually surprise us. And I think I'm also speaking with my identity also as a academician, and then I think it's so impressive for me to see like how these teachers and when they join this program, and they are like transformed to be like suddenly different kind of educators. And I think one of like the key factors for why is it different now is also the democratizing the opportunity to join the school leadership training. In the past, we wait for those who are already in the maybe like the older teachers in the school, or the one with the higher rank, and therefore then they justify them to join the school leadership training, and then therefore to be the next school leaders. So it's kind of like a hierarchical way. And now we're democratizing the opportunity. So we have a selection process in which teachers who are in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, or actually we make it the limit to the 50-year old, because we want to make sure that they have 10 years after they've completed the program to give the impact to the community, to the school community. um so we have participants in their 20s, surprisingly. And I mean, this is like not happening in the past. And it doesn't matter like their rank, and some even like contract teachers, like 20% of our participants in school leadership training, contract teachers. In short, like when they're good, and we have a selection process from the like the administrative, and then they have like teaching simulation, and also interview, and emphasizing on the values. And I think the selection process, I think, makes a difference. And we see now like and like we just graduated the first batch. Like we have like 3 batches running at the same time at the moment, and hopefully we can hit the number by 2024.
Great, thank you, and thank you for kind of giving us an overview of that ambitious program that you have at the ministry, and really kind of utilizing school leaders as a kind of key vehicle for change. Maybe if I could have you, Pak Iwan, just reflect on something specific that Rafa was speaking about earlier, when he was talking about one of the key enabling factors being trust in school leadership. And I'm curious to hear from your perspective as a policymaker in the ministry, how you kind of balance giving school leaders, trust to kind of implement, initiatives in their schools, with wanting to have some level of accountability to ensure consistency for students in your schools, and where there's tension there, how you think about navigating that.
Yeah, I think one of like the key factors, I think that I think we see working very well in our school leadership training, and therefore will translate later when these school leaders become school principals, is that it's about transforming the mindset is first. It's not like the how, but it's more about the why. So believe it or not, I think we started not to talk about leadership, but we first talked about why we are a teacher, why we are an educator. So I think the philosophy of like the identity of reflecting on who we are as an educator, I think that is key. And I think that's more give you more connection with like the values to student oriented values. We it's we see like a lot of like very emotional teachers, participants when they started the program with the why. And I think that is powerful because later when we talk about transforming the classroom, transforming the school and the community with parents, etc., and the values are already there, like, so then it makes it easier for them to then to have like this orientation, because they feel so uh, very transformative at the very beginning. I think that is the foundation of the change. So I think as a policymaker, for us is when we see, like the training, I think is working, and it's not about individual, like the most talented people in the training, but it's more about the sense of community among the participants. And then therefore going forward, I think as a policymaker, what we will keep strengthening is this community of the transformed educators who are the next generation of the school leaders in Indonesia. So it's not about the again, like individual parts, but yes, we're providing the autonomy. I think the school based management is one of in our education law, that's the principle to for education governance, although it's easier said than done. But with our change that we're seeing now in the ecosystem, we believe that the transform school leaders with the orientation for student learning, first and foremost, it's about the students and their learners. I think that's very fundamental. And then whatever happens next, when they have problems, it will follow. I think it's very important also and I think this is what we're seeing too, the orientation for like asset-based thinking instead of deficit-based thinking. So it's not like waiting for things to be perfect and then we can then make change, but it's about like looking at what we have around us and then see that as an asset to reach the goal that we want. And it's only by collaboration. And I think the fundamental value in Indonesian culture is called gotong royong. I think that is like gotong royong is not just about collaboration. Gotong royong is about like having the social empathy and social responsibility. You feel that others' problem is also part of like your problem, and then others' success is also part of your success. So you have the responsibility to help each other because that will make your community stronger.
Thank you, Pak Iwan. I think that gotong royong is a very powerful concept to reflect on, and I do want to take that a little bit further, but I'm going to just pause here just to thank all the panelists that have joined. So Pak Iwan, Sabrina, Rafa, and Folawe, as well as Harry for introductory remarks. We're now going to shift to the question and answer section of the panel. And so I see people are starting to put questions into the chat. So if you do have questions, please continue to enter them in the chat, and we will take them and provide them to our panelists. And panelists, I will be asking individual folks questions, but if you do want to jump in, this is definitely more of a free form discussion. So don't feel limited by where I'm taking the discussion, but feel free to kind of add in your thoughts. So I'm going to just start actually with Folawe. To kind of, since you kicked off this part of the discussion, to kind of bring you back and maybe kind of two questions, and you can kind of take this wherever you want. But one is to kind of reflect on what Pak Iwan was saying about gotong royong and just this idea of community within particularly school leadership. If you have any experience in your program in Nigeria around the power of getting school leaders to speak with each other and what that has done. And then kind of maybe more broadly, as you reflect on all the presentations from Sabrina, Rafa, and Pak Iwan, as a practitioner, kind of what's sitting with you.
Thank you so much, Samir. And I was really hoping to get a chance to, just engage with just some of the contributions that I've heard. And speaking to the community piece, some of the questions that we've asked the participants on our school leadership program is, what has been the most useful model or experience, that we've created, with this fellowship? And a lot of them have said just the space to be able to work together with their colleagues, the space to be able to share experiences, learn from one another, and just the share simplicity of just identifying that, they are all having very similar experiences, very, their problems are not only unique to them, but then just having that space to really share, to collaborate and work together. One of the things that we've also embedded into the program is also enabling the school leaders to be able to engage with parents and stakeholders. So one of the interesting things that we saw happen during the school closure in Nigeria, in the regions that we're working with, was that we saw school leaders who were engaging with community members like the imams, the pastors, who had church buildings, who had paging system in those buildings, and who were then playing pre-recorded lessons for children in certain communities to learn from. That level of collaboration and engagement that we saw beyond just their own teachers, but also with parents, we saw how that really helped for continued learning among students. So it's one of the elements that we have sort of brought into the program to ensure that there is deliberate and intentional engagement across board. The head teacher that I was referring to, who has partnered with another school to use up a space in within their school environment to to develop a farm that is allowing them to generate income to serve their school and to provide the funding required to run their school. I think those are some of the collaborations that we've seen happen from that front. I think one of the things that I think it was Rafael that referred to around the trust, I find that is just so important. Same thing happening in Latin America is the same thing we're experiencing here in Nigeria. The system is so bureaucratic. The head teachers are so restricted that, they literally just have to almost tick certain boxes and just follow the book. But, same thing with what you're seeing in Latin America. The teachers and the head teachers who are most outstanding are the ones who go above and beyond. For example, the head teachers who were able to, set up cluster schools, during the school closure, who were able to engage with parents, to use up their compounds, to set up community clusters, to continue, having their teachers teach students. We saw that there were learning gains there. We saw that children continued to learn there. But these are things that ideally, when you look at the books and the policies, you're not allowed to do those sort of things. Teachers, for example, who are not following the timetable and the school calendar to the T, those teachers and head teachers who are creating clubs and extracurricular activities, and finding ways to run outdoor classrooms and things like that to really engage their students and make classrooms effective. We're seeing that those are the ones, the dynamic teachers, where we're seeing really high performance, across those goals. One of the other things that I believe it was I think it was Dewi who responded to that or talked about that, is the need to also train teachers. And so we found out that yes, we could have dynamic teachers, but if we don't have innovative teachers as well, who are all supporting, the leadership of that head teacher, not much impact or transformation will happen. And so on top of setting up the school leadership program, one of the things that we also did was starting an existing teacher training, where we get teachers, excellent teachers, to cascade training to all other teachers across the schools. So for example, one of the things that we're seeing now is we're not going to a school and only seeing 3 classrooms have very colorful displays, well-arranged classrooms, or classrooms arranged in such a way that it enables collaboration amongst us. We're seeing that happen across all the classrooms in the school. And so it's also important that, yes, we're developing the school leader, but then we're also really thinking about the teachers who are in the classrooms and thinking about how all of that learnings, the expertise needed for schools to thrive, are also cascaded, across board. I'll stop there, Samir. And
Perfect. I'd like to actually ask Rafa to just kind of go off of what you were saying, Fulawe, and a question that's been sitting in my head as I've been hearing all of you speak is, I think there's kind of two and maybe I'm certainly oversimplifying, but in my head, there's certainly kind of these two kind of characters of the school leader. One who's this kind of dynamic person who's kind of going and knows what the needs are of the students and is kind of, listening to the rules and not listening to the rules as is required to kind of impact students. And then there's another who is kind of just implementing what we know works, right? So like like what Sabrina was mentioning in Ghana, there's a differentiated teaching program or teaching at the right level type program that they're trying in Ghana, and the role of the school leader just to make sure that that program is happening, right? And using kind of simple tools like a checklist to make sure that that's happening. And Rafa, I'm curious if you have reflections on that dichotomy, or maybe it's not, but how you think about what in this moment for low and middle income countries and school leadership are we actually aiming for? Are we aiming for this dynamic leader that kind of has the answers on their own, or are we aiming for this leader who is kind of following what is given, but kind of making existing processes more efficient?
I think that there's a false trade-off in your question. So you don't have to go for these like corner solutions, as economists would say. I think that we need leaders that know to a certain extent what are good practices. Maybe a good school leader doesn't have to be a researcher that is on top of the literature, but a good leader is that one that first of all knows what's the importance of his or her job in shaping the future of students. So the school leader, a good school leader should be aware that the main goal is for all students to learn. And for that to happen, he or she has to not go into corner solutions, just following a book, a recipe book, or be all the time outside of the school, be dynamic, but it has to do what it takes given the problematic that he or she is facing in that school. A good school leader should be able to get out of the office because as Followay, I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing well your name, but Followay was saying, look, they're just ticking boxes. And this is what we see in Mexico and in much of Latin America is for many years, the education authorities conceived school directors as some bureaucrat that they're ticking boxes and filling forms to inform the center. And this is exactly what we don't want. We want a pedagogical leader, somebody that is able to enter the classroom, provide feedback to teachers, make some linkages between what's happening in the classroom and what he's observing in terms of student learning outcomes measured by standardized testing. Then also pull the resources from the rest of the education system, school supervisors, financial resources, some technical assistance that is coming from the local or the central educational authorities, but is able to align all these resources, including parents, towards the main goal that is enabling student learning.
Thank you for that and for taking me out of the dichotomy that was in my head. Sabrina, I would love to bring you in here and one is just to reflect on whatever you're hearing, but two, you didn't get a chance to speak about this in your introductory comments, but I know that you've extended the work that you did in Ghana to show that female teachers were there was kind of undervalued relative to how effective they were by school leaders. So maybe if you could talk a little bit about that to kind of in the context of what is the implications of that work for capacity, for people doing capacity building of school leaders, and if there's anything there that we should be thinking about trying to work on in our training programs.
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I'm in agreement with to the earlier point, with everything that has come up in terms of finding teachers as well as leaders, as well as about um, their worth or their value in transforming future generations, about the recognition of the mission that they're after, which is in contrast with the mundane tasks that they do on an everyday basis. It's is in work that we've done in India and Pakistan, as well as in Ghana, with teachers and leaders, high amounts of burnout and stress amongst teachers as well as head teachers might detract them from why they're really there. So this sort of this broad and maybe somewhat vague, vague in terms of how do we move these things. That's a challenging part, but certainly it seems to be missing when we work with teachers. And for organizations like yourself and Falaves, should be a goal to sort of remind leaders of their broader mission, to give them opportunity to interact and as exchange experiences with folks who face similar challenges to what they do. Sometimes I see, teachers get super excited about having WhatsApp groups, or, just going to trainings where they can physically get a chance to interact with other leaders and teachers, would create the tinkering and the innovation that we need in many of these education curricula and teaching techniques seem to be and not dynamic like we see in other sectors. And then there's a whole other element of how leaders, the career paths of teachers. So these teachers will only do well when they're motivated by something in the future, by a upward movement in their careers, right? So we need motivated teachers. There might be some teachers who are motivated, who just need to see students learning for them to work hard, but then you need other kinds of incentives, both monetary and non-monetary. Those incentives include their trajectory as teachers. And the element that we've looked at that focuses on that element of teachers' progression, senior teachers and forwards from there, which include their assessment of their performance. Unfortunately, that's something that we have not focused very much on as a global community, and it needs work because there aren't very effective ways to assess the performance of public workers generally, but particularly for teachers. And I think this came up earlier, but for example of what you can do to improve leadership is just provide them with a way to do assessment of both students and teachers. And many schools are not doing it. They're not periodically recording student learning. I'm seeing the progression of student learning and seeing the progression of teachers' contribution to student learning. So in the absence of that, subjective assessments might be very important. By subjective assessments, I mean how your manager or your supervisor views you in terms of your efficacy. And that's what we look. The subjective assessments seem to vary a lot by supervisors. So supervisors tend to, for many reasons, this can be true for many reasons, but tend to provide subjective assessments for male workers. It's supervisors of teachers, so it's head teachers and the teachers that work in the schools. Male teachers are ranked subjectively better by their supervisors, even though they are not objective. If you look at if you just use one dimension of performance, such as student test scores, female teachers are providing higher value added. That might have to do with the selection of female teachers in the school. So we sort of are again not the case. Maybe only the very, very females enter the teaching profession or whatever, but we see higher objective measures of performance of female teachers. But we don't see that reflected in how their supervisors view them. And that can eventually trickle down to student learning. If it leads to a confidence gap in teachers, if it leads to teachers not understanding their own performance, it can reflect in the classroom, and it can also affect eventually their performance through through the negative effect that it might have on the career trajectory. So that is part of leadership trainings, understanding these bias trainings, which is a challenge not just in developing countries or in nascent education systems, but also in advanced ones. How do we get rid of these implicit biases? And what are the most effective trainings to address these kinds of things amongst leaders? Because again, it can eventually matter for student learning through its effect on teachers. That is something I would encourage practitioners to think about, to bring into the collection of things that you think about when the target is to improve leadership in school.
Excellent. Thanks, Sabrina. I think that the concern around equity at the teacher, certainly at the teacher level, but I think that, as you're saying, kind of connects to equity at the student level as well. And I'd like to kind of zoom into that piece around equity a little bit and ask Ba Iwan to come in. And there's been a few questions in the chat around COVID-19, which is something that's certainly kind of accelerated equity concerns. And so as you think about this moment of schools reopening, Ba Iwan, and concerns around equity, how do you think about the role of school leadership to kind of bridge those inequities, whether it's the type that Sabrina was talking about with maybe a gender bias against teachers or other concerns that might be there in the school system in Indonesia, particularly in this moment of COVID-19 and school reopening?
Yeah, I think this is actually what I just saw like today when I visited two schools, elementary school in one of the most challenging areas in Nusa Tenggara, Indonesia. Um, that I mean, it's obvious like how the good school leaders make a difference. I think uh, why I mean, like they are good. I think first of course, like they already have that foundation, like the sense of purpose to serve the students, but then it's not enough, right? So I think looking at the impact of COVID-19 and that can trigger the school leaders then to think differently and then to take the risk to try something new, try something different. I think it also needs to be supported by again like the community, and here I see the how like the collaboration between the local government, because we are a very decentralized education system. So they have the autonomy, but the local government, they also are they have like this sense of urgency about like what to do, and then they work with like a development partner that provide the data. And I think this is where the trigger the school leaders then to start to question, okay, so the data like the learning loss is so real, and then they start to get together with other school principals within their area, and they started a workshop. And in this workshop they discuss about what strategies that they could use, and they came up with this model focusing on literacy and numeracy in half of their school hours for the students. And we are still like of course with the limited school reopening condition because of the COVID-19. The students need to rotate and etc. So they experimented a new idea, which is they started the school with focusing just like literacy for half of the time when the students are in school, and this and they did an assessment first, like diagnostic assessment. So in literacy and numeracy, they used the pratham, actually the assessment, that very simple system, and then they have like this category of where the students are. There are 6 levels, for their model, and then they have like mixed grouping. So first grade with like second grade and third grade can be in the same room for half of the day in the school. Before then, the second half of the day they go back to their own classrooms. And I mean, like, this is not some a common thing in Indonesia, and the confidence of these teachers, or the courage rather, that the school leaders just to take risks, and then to implement this, and the support from the local government and the development partner that supply with like the data and help with the data analysis, really like make the change that's happening in the school. So one of the schools that I visited was the school that started the change, and the other one was the school that saw the change in the school, and then they also use that model in their school. So the second one was kind of like a bit later in the this experimentation of this new idea, but the results was just like there were students who were so like not confident. They felt like there this student, the particular student I'm talking about, is like in the fourth grade, and he felt like so far in his school years he's been labeled as quote unquote stupid kid, right? And for the first time, and he felt that now he feels like, hey, I can do something, and maybe like like the pandemic, and teach at the right level, this whole student oriented focus, maybe pandemic made or push the school community to change. But again, it's the school leaders who first like started to see like this opportunity, and then they got together, and they made this decision. But I also want to emphasize that the support system around, like the local education office, the local government, and also collaboration with the university, and that's also something that I was surprised to see, because the university, the local government, and the school, they work together towards the same orientation, which is helping the student learning. This is in the wake of the learning loss, as we all know. So yeah, I just want to share about that an observation I saw today, and I think that, and this is like a one of like very very modest area in Indonesia. So I think if it can work here, it can work anywhere basically. But the collaboration, I think again, it's very very important.
Thank you, Pa Iwan. That goes back to your gotong royong, kind of that same
Yes,
sense of
exactly.
shared
Yeah.
responsibility. And I think that's a nice place to kind of pause the discussion here for now. I think there's some questions in the chat that we were not able to get to, and I would have loved to have this conversation carry on for a lot longer. But I think it would be nice to have Harry now come in and just kind of summarize the discussion and your own kind of thoughts as you've kicked off the panel, and now as you've heard the panelists speak, what's sitting with you to close this out.
Thank you, Samir. Fascinating discussion. A great idea to share across programs and countries, and I was happy to hear the work that's going on and the thoughtful questions that came through. A few key takeaways and one thought from me, or a couple of thoughts. But Iwan talked about the important shifts from training teachers to school leaders that the Ministry of Education in Indonesia is doing. That's something I'd like to come back to at the end. Falawe identified from the practice how supportive school leaders make a difference, especially in terms of supporting their teachers. Rafa suggested that capacity building of school leaders should target um, very large effects or a long enough time to impact student learning outcomes. We're not going to see immediate gains from some of these programs, especially when it comes to student test scores and the like. Sabrina highlighted that school management or school leaders training that needs to be combined with an intervention that can influence what happens in the classroom. All great thoughts. One thing that occurred to me is that as we were talking about these experience from the various countries represented here, you can't stop but think the incredible pressure that we put on school leaders in developing countries. In many countries, school heads are promoted teachers. So someone that was great at teaching, managing a classroom becomes essentially an administrator. That might not be their forte or what they really want to do, and it's not always the case that a great teacher is a great administrator. Whereas in high performing, high income countries, people prepare for school leadership long before they enter the school. In fact, in many countries, you can't be a school leader unless you train for it. And then there's a selection process for that as well. And what we're seeing in many countries that are shifting from this older model of promoting teachers to having professional leaders in schools, this does improve management considerably. So that's one thought that occurred to me. Also, I agree with Rafa when he says, we need school leaders that will improve learning outcomes. I mean, who would disagree with that? But that's not the only thing that school leaders have to do. And I think the pandemic showed just how important leadership is. I mean, school leaders are also charged with safety and security of schooling, of the schools and the students. And we're seeing in countries, I saw a report last week from Croatia that teachers are asking the ministry for protection against activists that are protesting the safety mandates, masks and the like, vaccinations. So there's a lot of things that we expect of the school leaders that require them to be more than just somebody aiding in the learning process, as important as that is, but there are many aspects of this. But great discussion, and I'm glad to say that this is part of a series of seminars on school leadership. In fact, this is the second in a series of 3 webinars organized by global school leaders and the World Bank. The next one will be in November. Look for that announcement. Let me join Samir in thanking the panelists, the organizers, Sharanya, thank you, Iwan, Falawi, Rafa, Sabrina, and all of you for your questions and discussions. Thank you, and goodbye.
Thank you, everyone.
Ciao, thanks.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.